Hello, good evening. My name is Kamau Mahakoe, and I will be presenting on the Ministry of Education and in Youth and Information in Jamaica policy on the payment of school fees in Jamaica. All right, so I'm sharing the screen. And as I go along, I'm going to be discussing the issues relating to this policy. So the course is Theory and Practice in Educational Leadership and Management, and my course instructor is Trudy Richards. So a number of Jamaican parents were complaining about the fact that school fees at government and private institutions were mandatory. If the school fees were not paid, the students could find themselves being turned away until all arrears were cleared. And they beseeched the government to reconsider the matter. So prior to 2017, there were school fees that were mandatory. Jamaican schools from the primary level to the secondary level in both government and private institutions were mandatory, right? And a lot of parents were struggling to pay the school fees. And what they found was happening was that if they could not pay the school fee, they were turned away. The students were turned away. And in being turned away, they would miss the classes and they would fall behind in their lessons. At the time, the Minister of Education was the Honorable Senator Royal Reid, and Mr. Reid and his team were tasked with coming up with a solution to this issue. So there were several joint select committee meetings in Parliament. The matter was debated as policies are. Policies and laws have to go through a very rigorous process of debate and consultations of the stakeholders involved, and so as to come up with the best solution for all the stakeholders. And in this case, the stakeholders would be the government of Jamaica, the Ministry of Education, as well as the principals and staff of the schools, the parents, and the teachers. All of those persons would be affected by the policy. So it was a delicate matter because the government wanted to have a solution that everyone would be satisfied with. And what the ministry decided to do was to declare that school fees were no longer mandatory. So as of August 2017, the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in Jamaica issued a new funding policy as it related to the payment of school fees in the island schools. According to the Jamaica Information Service, Education, Youth and Information Minister, Senator the Honorable Royal Reid, has reiterated the government's position that no student must be turned away from school because of non-payment of fees. Additionally, there should be no mandatory auxiliary fees. The Ministry of Education has released the funding guidelines for public schools after concluding consultations with secondary school principals on the weekend. So this was in June 2016. And this has effectively removed auxiliary fees for public schools and provides for an increase in subventions to some secondary schools under the Education Act and regulations. And this was an article published in the Gleaner newspaper on June 27, 2016. So these are some of the terms of the new policy that was introduced. You can see on the screen the terms of the policy. So the government was saying no child should be turned away, and the government would be providing a fixed amount of money to each school annually to see about the running of the school. The government also noted that there were breaches in the agreed limits in registration packages. So before a child could gain entry to school, they would have to pay a registration fee. So these are new students coming into the school, would have to pay a registration fee. And up until then, each school could decide how much that registration fee would be. The government came in and the government said the registration fee should not exceed $5,000. So anywhere from $0 to $5,000. Some schools were charging up to $10,000 for registration packages. So when the government came in with this new policy, that had to stop, at least in the government institutions. So the government wanted to have a standardized school fee and standardized registration fee policy, so as not to discriminate against any of the students, whether they be at the primary level or the secondary level. The government was also insisting that parents, that principals did not include the cost of epaulets, uniforms, and student handbooks and tie-pins in the package that the parents were obligated to pay. In addition to Parent Teachers Association dues, the government was saying these are not obligatory, right? So before this time, schools mandated that these fees be paid. So this policy was implemented in the 2016 to 2017 school year. So here we have the charges that relate to registration packages should be kept between Jamaican $1,000 and $5,000. And students should not be prevented from attending school if the registration package is not paid for. So I'm quoting from the Gleaner newspaper, November 20, 2016. So the historical and current perspective on the policy. So prior to 2017, there was a mandatory school fee to be paid before entry was granted. And this is for students attending private and government primary and secondary institutions. There were also auxiliary fees such as PTA fees, registration fees, and those associated with gaining access to technical facilities, such as computer labs, audiovisual labs, right? The strengths and weaknesses of the policy. The Jamaican populace was divided on the policy, very sharply divided. The principals and other school officials were opposed to the policy on the grounds that their main source of funding would dry up. They argued that the annual monies allocated by the government could hardly keep the schools afloat and that they needed the school fees in order to balance their books. The parents, on the other hand, embraced the policy because they had come to view the mandatory school fees as exploitative and unfair. The strength of the policy is that the government had prioritized the students and was insisting that no child be left behind. on account of its parents' inability to pay the school fees. The weakness of the policy is that schools were now left to fend for themselves in terms of sourcing finances to bridge the gaps created by the policy. Even though an amount was allotted to each school, the principals and the bursars argued that this was a measly amount that could not in any way cover the overheads of running a modern school, what with computer labs, science labs, swimming pools, and other facilities to maintain. The schools resorted to clever ways of collecting funds from parents, nonetheless charging suspicious fees that inevitably tallied in the long run to what the school fees had been to begin with. While no child was turned away for not paying these fees, parents and students complained of facing stigma and stereotypical treatment from schools if they were among the paupers who could not fork out the cash for these fees. So the policy only led to covert means of extracting the school fees. How the policy affects schools, teaching, learning. The policy affects schools in that parents can opt not to pay the school fees outlined, and when they refuse to do so, the schools cannot meet the needs of the upkeep for the facilities and services that the school had become accustomed to providing for its populace. As a result, the school might find itself curtailing or removing such services at the detriment of the student body. Principals and teachers might feel resentful and demotivated to perform. Parents might feel vengeful and entitled. Students might be discriminated against. Ways that teachers and schools can mitigate the negative impact of the policy. In addition to the fixed budget allocated by the Ministry of Education, schools need to find alternative means of raising funds to settle the financial obligations of operation. This can be in the form of fundraising events such as barbecues, concerts, fish fries, raffles, and contests. Schools should maintain and enforce a no discrimination policy towards its students and parents so that those who genuinely cannot afford the school fees are not made to feel at odds or suffer in any way as a direct result. Every child can learn, every child must learn. Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, Jamaica. We can do it. Yes, we can. So this policy is still very controversial even today, 2023. This policy is still a controversial policy. Parents will either go to private institutions and insist that their students be accepted, even though they cannot pay the school fees. Is this fair to these institutions who have their overheads to consider? They have all these costs that they have school grounds to maintain, they have labs to maintain. The parents, are they too entitled? Perhaps the government in this policy has made the parents feel too entitled. It's something that is still up for debate, and it's possible that this policy will be revised. So that is left to be seen.